Why, Grandma, it's starting to snow. The grandmother peered up at the sky. It couldn't have been snowing. It's a clear day in spring. She waited for snow to fall. On March 3rd, 1876, scientists, skeptics and press descended to the small town of Olympia Springs in Kentucky after this bizarre event. The grandmother named Mrs. Crouch and neighbours gave accounts of what happened. The meat fell from a clear sky for around 10 minutes at mid-morning. Most of the meat were flaky pieces, no more than 3 inches, and some pieces got as large as 8 inches. On the Crouch farm alone, the meat could fill a horse wagon. Mrs. Crouch and her grandson scrambled back inside until her husband came home. Later, Mrs. Crouch stated to the press that she thought that it was a miracle of God. We do not understand. She also stated that she had a harrowing thought that a vague idea that my husband and son, who were away, had been torn to pieces, and the remains were being brought home to me in this way by wind, flashed through my mind at this moment. Despite Mrs. Crouch and other neighbours' worries, the livestock seemed unaffected. The Crouch's cows carried on grazing, and their dogs sniffed and even ate the sky meat. She and many others took samples of the meat for inspection, noting that these were not clean cuts of meat, but looked misshapen and torn. Joe Jordan, another eyewitness, took 2 samples and shared with his neighbour J.M. Bent. Together they ate the fallen meat before spitting it out. Joe Jordan reported that the meat had the consistency of mutton or venison. Some of these samples went to universities and labs for testing. The people of Olympia Springs hoped that analysis would clear the mystery of this event, but scientists were split about the origin of this meat. One of the first theories to explain this incident was that the meat falling wasn't meat at all. Leopold Brandeis, a water treatment specialist, contributed to a journal called The Sanitarian. He claimed that the substance he had studied was not meat, but nostoc. Nostoc is not meat, but a cyanobacterium. This is a type of algae known to sometimes fall with rain, explaining the sudden downpour. Nostoc can be in different colours, which could explain the red-brown appearance. A professor of toxicology called Lawrence Smith held a similar view with Brandeis. Smith thought that it was not meat, but frog spawn that got carried by wind. Both of these men had received samples, but neither did any chemical analysis nor inspection under a microscope. Furthermore, nostoc falls with rain, not by itself, and the previous night before this event, Mrs. Crouch reported that it was a clear sky, making this theory shaky. Brandeis, Smith's, and many other samples from Kentucky went to scientists all over America. One of these recipients was Dr. Edwards, president of the Scientific Association in New York. He placed a sample on a slide, and under microscope, he found this. There's without a doubt that this was animal meat. After further examination, Edwards concluded that these samples of cartilage, striated muscle, and connective tissue were from the lung of a farm animal like a horse, or a human infant. The tissue composition of lungs in these two are so similar it is hard to tell apart. This makes this event even more peculiar. How did it rain? A leading theory was that it was strong winds or the tail end of a tornado. Kentucky is notorious for having both, with many things being lifted in the air. It is not out of the question that a horse or child could have swept up and met a horrible end, but this seems unlikely. As said before, it was a clear night before the coronal shower, and no reports of strong tornadoes or winds were made. The most likely theory is vultures. Vultures are notorious for vomiting up their food, and when travelling in a group, if one throws up, they all start to disgorge. Furthermore, vultures are common in Kentucky and travel in groups, so it is possible that a large group of vultures vomited up meat. Yet, Mrs. Crouch and other eyewitnesses never reported seeing vultures overhead. Even if vultures explain the dropping of the meat, we still don't exactly know what type of meat it is. The last remaining sample of this meat is in Transylvania University, preserved in a jar. Without further analysis, it is impossible to know whether this meat came from a farm animal or a child.